Well, good morning and welcome to the AgNow Roundup. My name is Dave Deacon. This morning, we're talking sugar beets. The northern states, especially those in the Midwest and the northern plains, offer ideal conditions for sugar beet growth. Their cooler temperatures and extended daylight during the growing season contribute to high yields and quality sugar content. The hardiness of the sugar beets help them to thrive in a whole range of environmental conditions. Add that with modern farming techniques and technological innovations, well, this has helped the U.S. maintain a foothold in the sugar beet world. Outside of its agricultural impact, sugar beet production is a cornerstone for rural economies, especially along the North Dakota and Minnesota border, providing a stable source of income for farmers and supporting a thriving sugar industry that caters to both domestic and international markets. Today we'll be talking with Dr. Tom Peters with the University of Minnesota and North Dakota State University about the perfect growing conditions for sugar beets in his part of the world. But first, let's take a look at the weather across sugar beet country and the rest of the United States with meteorologist Matt Makins.
Time for the AgNow Weather Report. Matt Makins here. Hope it finds you doing well and happy holidays to you. Big changes as we wrapped up November and move into December. Much more active pattern, but it doesn't necessarily last too long. In terms of drought, especially up to the north, since we're chatting about sugar beets today, the drought impact has not grown much at all over the recent weeks. And it's not likely to grow too much more here in the Dakotas. It may grow in addition to what we see here down across the south and into sections of the Corn Belt down through Kansas. But as far as northern plains, pretty much locking in that soil moisture now, or at least trying to. Let's take a look at soil temperatures. Reds, that's still warm soil. The white dots, that's close to freezing. And then the blue dots represent soil that has frozen. Why do I show this? Well, when we add moisture onto frozen soil, very little of that moisture is actually able to penetrate. So it's of little use. But where we're closer to freezing, still have some thawed soil, if you will, and warm soil, that's where we can add some water. And for a lot of cases, we're not too frozen just yet. So any additional water over the next, say, 7 to 10, 20 days actually has a chance of some penetration, which will be valuable for us. Here's an animation over 10 days showing areas of snow and rain. The big focus is going to be from the south into the southeast and to the east. That's where we're going to have quite a bit of rainfall coming in this week. Areas of snowfall for the west, mostly in the high country, the Rockies, the Cascades, the Sierras, and then coastal rain showers. For the northern plains, we'll catch some hit and miss areas of rain and snow as we get into early days of December, about a week from right now. But not a lot of water is on the way. So if you combine all of that, all frozen or liquid precip into one combination, we only have little dots here on the map for the northern high plains. Not a high likelihood to get much precip. Most of it's going to be down to the southeast. I mean, we have sections here in the Gulf Coast states approaching 4 or 5 inches. The Four Corners region will have some moisture, and another big bullseye out along the coastal areas of the Pacific Northwest with several inches of rainfall coming their way. But for most of the central and northern plains, relatively dry over the next week. And with that, it will be a combination of some rainfall as well as some snow. But snow totals obviously won't be very much at all. They'll be confined to the Rockies, Sierras, and Cascades, and then we'll also have some lake effect snows here around the Great Lakes. So bottom line here is that the plains, even though the soils are not really firmed up yet, they're able to hold on some water. Sadly, the other side of that is we don't have a lot of water to come. But it still looks like we're going to keep the drought numbers in check as we've had for right now. As we get into mid-December, so we kind of chatted about the next 7 to 10 days. Mid-December for moisture likely below average in the same areas. And water will spread from the west down across the south and the southeast, and temperatures still remain mild into mid-December. That's this week's AgNow Weather Report. Matt Makins here. We'll see you next time.
Well, thank you so much, Matt. Over the recent Thanksgiving holiday, odds are that you may have had baked goods or other foods that were naturally sweetened from sugar derived from sugar beets. So this week on the AgNow Roundup, we're learning about sugar beet production in the northern Red River Valley of Minnesota and North Dakota from Dr. Tom Peters with the University of Minnesota and North Dakota State University. Thank you for going on with us this morning, Dr. Peters. And I guess let's start out with what makes the Red River Valley of Minnesota and North Dakota so perfect for sugar beet production.
Yeah. So, we have about 60% of the 1.1 million acres of sugar beets. And there's a reason for that, Dave. So, first of all, and I got to end with the most important part. So, I'll start with the softer ideas. We have really good soil for growing sugar beets with high water holding capacities, meaning that our sugar beets are not irrigated. Now we have some acres, but by and large, we're relying on Mother Nature for rainfall to grow our crop. Number two, during the summer, we have 16-hour days here. So those, days where the sun is out at 5:30 in the morning and doesn't set till 9:30 at night really benefits sugar beet production. In the fall, we start to get cooler. We have cooler nights in September and October, and that's important during the sugar accumulation phase. And then finally, we have cold winters. So it's the 27th of November, and it's 15 degrees outside my office today. And those cold winters are good for storing sugar beets. So we're able to store them outside from October all the way to the end of the processing campaign, which can go into mid or late May. So it's several factors that contribute to this being an area that is good for sugar beets.
Is it a rotational crop or is it just a primary, every year we go back to sugar beets in this area?
The rotation, that's an excellent question. The rotation is extremely important. So sugar beets are, I would call them wimps, if you don't mind me saying that. They don't do very well with diseases, especially. So we are usually on a 4-year rotation. We'll rotate with grass and broadleaf crops, but the year before sugar beets, we would prefer to have a grass crop. So either corn or, and I'll say most of the time it's small grains, wheat, barley, oats. That is the previous crop. But that 4-year rotation is critical to having a healthy sugar beet crop.
Now, I'm going back to my undergrad plants and people class many years ago. Sugar beets are a tuber, correct?
I call it a root crop.
Okay.
The tap root is where sugar accumulates. So what we do at harvest time is we harvest that tap root. Mm-hmm. So maybe you can think about a carrot. So we all harvest carrots in the summer and in the fall, but if you leave the carrot in the ground, the next year it would create a flower and make seed. So those are biennial crops, and sugar beet is a biennial crop, just like carrot. However, we're not interested in making seed. We harvest that tap root and we extract sugar from it.
In that process of planting the crop, it more than like I assume that it actually helps increase the quality of the soil, because I know that across certain parts of the country, folks will plant turnips to help break up the soil and help increase the quality. Is that the same approach whenever it comes to sugar beets?
Yeah, and I would say specifically it's the length of the tap root. So some of the soil scientists have done experiments that have demonstrated the tap root will go 8 to 10 feet into the soil. Wow. So that root system is breaking up the hard pan and improving water infiltration into the soil. Now, people complain a lot about sugar beets. Sometimes they rob a lot of nutrition from the soil. So you have to do a good at replacing phosphorus, potassium, sometimes calcium and boron. But the structure of the root is really good at breaking up the soil, which improves the other crops in the rotation.
You mentioned that there is a lot of management that goes into the sugar beets because of different pressures. What kind of insect and disease pressures do we look for whenever we're growing sugar beets?
Yeah. So let's start with insects, and there's really two that stand out. So in some parts of our sugar beet growing region, we have an insect called the sugar beet root maggot. The root maggot. So it overwinters. It's a fly that overwinters as a larva in the soil, and in the spring, these insects are feeding on the root of the sugar beet. They're kind of gnawing away at the root of the developing sugar beet. And unfortunately, the beet at that stage is extremely tender, and that causes a loss of stand if we don't manage it correctly. The other insect is a foliar insect that we have in some areas. It's a plant bug. I can't think of the name right offhand, Dave, but it's a plant bug style insect that affects the foliage of the plant, and sometimes it causes a disease in the foliage itself. So two diseases that really stand out the most for us, one soil-borne, one foliar. So Dave, we covered insects, okay? Let's go on to diseases, and then we'll do weeds last.
Okay.
So like insects, we have a soil-borne disease and a foliar disease. So I think some of your listeners are familiar with Rhizoctonia, Rhizoctonia solani, and that is an important root-borne disease that we have in sugar beets, especially in years when it's wet and warm. Soils are warm and we have wet conditions. We have some chemical products that protect the beets, and some of our varieties do better than others. So that's the soil-borne. But the real important one, Dave, is a leaf disease called Cercospora leaf spot. So Cercospora will physically turn the green leaves brown.
Wow.
And the problem with that is the sugar beet wants to immediately make new leaves, and it does, but it does that at the expense of the sugar in the taproot. So we're remobilizing sugar to make leaves. So what we'd rather do is to protect the leaves that we have. So we manage the Cercospora very, very carefully by following both the air temperature and the humidity of the air, especially at night. And then we have a very aggressive spray program that we use. So I would say that the diseases, both root diseases and foliar diseases, are probably the most important that are managed. And then finally, we have weeds. Now, sugar beet is a Roundup ready crop. So we're using Roundup on as probably the number one product in sugar beet production. And 100% of our sugar beets are Roundup ready sugar beets. And then in addition to Roundup, we're using products that control pigweed.
Okay.
And I know your growers are familiar with pigweed. Ours is called water hemp here. We don't have any Palmer amaranth yet, thank goodness. And we're going to keep that one out as long as we can.
Right.
But we're controlling water hemp using a season-long strategy that starts at planting time and goes through the month of August. There's some other weeds, but by and large, pigweed is the one that we manage the most.
Whenever it comes to harvesting the crop, how does it work? I mean, in my mind, I think of a peanut production, the peanut harvester coming along and upturning the soil. Is that the same way with sugar beets? And then what do you do with them after they're harvested?
So, for most of the beets in Minnesota and North Dakota, it's a two-step operation. 2 steps. So the first machine that comes through is removing the foliage. Okay? Sugar beets have very lush foliage, and we rub that off. So the machine has a series of rubber. I'm trying to think of the right word, but the machine rubs the tops off the sugar beets. In some places, they actually scalp the top maybe inch of the sugar beet to remove any of the foliage that's left behind from the beaters that are on the defoliator. So that's the first step, and we usually have the defoliator run right in front of the lifter, and that's especially important when it's cold out.
Right.
We don't want to have 50 acres of tops removed. We like to have about 50 feet of tops removed. And then the second operation is what we call a lifter. So it's a machine that has wheels that physically lift the beet out of the soil. And then a series of conveyors, we call them potato chains, that remove the soil from the beets and then lift them into either a tank on the machine, or it elevates them into a truck that runs alongside of the lifter. So our equipment is at minimum 6-row equipment, but most of the time 12-row equipment. So we're very automated now and able to lift beets very efficiently. Now, we have a nemesis at harvest. We actually have 2. One of them is muddy conditions, because, if you're lifting this beet out of the soil, it has to be dry enough to get the machinery into the field. So years where we have a lot of fall rain, that causes challenges for us. And the second challenge that we have is an unexpected frost. So we start our harvest in October, and we can get frost anytime, from end of September into the first 2 weeks of October. So we wait that long, Dave, because we're storing them outside. We have to have conditions that are cool enough so that we can store the beets. But we don't want it so cold that we have frost challenges. What frost will do is it'll wound the sugar beet. So if we do have frost, we've got to wait a few days for the sugar beet to heal itself, to recover from that event. But when we start harvest, and again, it's not like corn and soybeans where you've got to wait till maturity. In sugar beets, we just arbitrarily decide. And usually it's the 1st of October when we start, depending on what day of the week that is. And once we start, it is a sprint.
Right.
These guys, they work 24 hours a day with multiple shifts of labor to harvest. And usually what happens is these semi trucks that collect the sugar beets, they will dump the product at what we call piling stations. So a factory could have 5 or 6 piling stations around the factory that reduces the amount of trucking that's done by the farmer. The farmer harvests them and delivers to a piling station, and then the cooperative is responsible for moving them from the piling station to the factory, and they do that all winter long with a contracted organization.
That's amazing. So it really is a waiting game, and then all hands on deck. Let's get this done, and then on to the factory after that.
I like to joke with people, harvest is the only time when you can go to Subway at 4 in the morning and have a sandwich, because the businesses are open to support the sugar beet growers, and that includes having food available for the people that are working the night shifts.
That's great. And then after it goes to the factory, tell us about how the actual sugar is extracted from the beet.
Yeah. So the first step at the factory is to grind the beet up into cassettes. So you might call them, they're not shaped like French fries, but that's kind of what it is, a bunch of small pieces. And the second step after that is an extracting process. So it removes the sugar and all of the impurities that are in the flesh part of the sugar beet root, and it separates that, and that liquid material then is moved to the third part of the phase, which is reducing the moisture, the water,
Right.
and concentrating the sugar. So, and then the sugar is dried. There's centrifugal devices that'll dry the sugar, and then it's transported in box cars to various facilities. So a lot of the sugar that's produced in Minnesota and North Dakota is transported on box cars into the Chicagoland area, where it's stored, and then it's distributed mainly to bakeries and to candy manufacturers. So we also have a packaging line in in Moorhead at the factory, where they actually make 1 pound or 2.5 pound bags. But Dave, most of the sugar is in bulk, and it's transported in box cars or large sacks that contain the sugar.
It's amazing how such a taproot has really impacted an area like the Red River Valley there. Where did the sugar beet make its way from into that area?
Well, it's funny you mention that, because our immigrants in our area are mainly from Europe, and especially Eastern Europe. So a lot of the immigrants remember growing sugar beets in Europe, and they say, these soils are similar to back home. Why can't we do this here? And that's really how it got started here, is because there weren't factories, Dave. The closest factory at the time was in the Minneapolis area. So people said, we could grow sugar beets back home, and we had soils like this. Let's see if we can grow sugar beets here. And that was really the start of it. Once they demonstrated that they could grow sugar beets, then the American Crystal Sugar Company, not the co-op,
Right.
The co-op came later. The company built a factory in Grand Forks, North Dakota, and then a second factory in Moorhead, Minnesota. And then over time, the company was bought by the farmers to become a cooperative. And now we have 5 factories, a total of 6 factories in the Red River Valley, and 1 factory in west central Minnesota. So 7 different factories representing 3 different cooperatives that we have.
You mentioned all of the areas that the sugar beet, touches in one way or another. It reminds me of cotton crops in some areas where they put out the crop, and then a lot of inputs, a lot of hope, and a lot of prayers going into the crop, and then the crop may fail. Are there years whenever it's been a lean year for sugar beets, or is it just a perpetual, hey, we put it in the ground, boom, we do our stuff, boom, we harvest it?
Well, we're very lucky this year. We're very fortunate. 2023 was relatively dry in Minnesota and eastern North Dakota. However, we were lucky. We had a lot of snow in the winter and not a lot of frost in the ground. So the snow melted and it gave us good early season moisture. And it seemed like we had just on time rainfall in 2023. So whenever it was getting dry, we received rain, and that enabled the crop to continue to develop. So the timely rain combined with that taproot really helped us. And Dave, we had a near record crop for the size of the taproot. We call that tons per acre, and also the percent sugar that's contained in the sugar beet. So year in and year out, I think that we can weather the storm a little better than some of the other commodities. But this was an exceptional year for us. And I attribute that to a number of factors, as I mentioned.
It's fun to talk with researchers, extension folks with the land-grant universities from across the country, because I know that there's always something that they're working on to help their crop grow better for the producers in their area. What are you currently working on in the research realm for sugar beet production?
Yeah, so actually 2 areas. So we've developed some sugar beet varieties that have even greater tolerance to the leaf spot disease than what I mentioned. So we can maybe eliminate 50 or maybe 60% of the sprays by using these Cercospora, I hesitate to call them resistant varieties, but they're heavily Cercospora tolerant varieties.
Right.
So we have that going. And then on the weed side, we're developing a new generation of sugar beet that will tolerate Liberty herbicide, dicamba herbicide, in addition to Roundup. And
wow.
that sugar beet should be available in the mid to later part of the decade for us.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Tom Peters, for going on with us and explaining how the sugar beets have really have created a foothold in the Red River Valley between Minnesota and North Dakota.
Enjoyed visiting with you, Dave, and telling our story about sugar beet production in Minnesota and North Dakota.
And of course, we want to thank you for watching this episode of the AgNow Roundup. If there's something on the show that you'd like to learn more about, visit our website, agnowtv.com. And while you're there, sign up for our social media and our email that comes out every week. From our farm to your farm, I'm Dave Deacon for AgNow.